There to Laurie Schwab with the New York Cosmos.
Still Johnson. Jones, this looks dangerous for Brisbane Lions. Jones, a good cross. Johnson. Arnold's forward, so's Manus Lamont, still Robbie Slater. Twisting and turning, getting that one across. Lamont! Manus Lamont!
Says the referee. Hayes is onside again. Shot! It's in the net! What a great goal by Graham Hayes! No call! Score!
Salamidi for Cole. Cole on the run. Shoots. 2-0.
Lazanovsky with the free kick. Launches a rocket! Trimboli. What vision!
Blasts.
Yes! That's it!
Vujovic.
Beautiful ball! Here's Bozanic. They haven't! They haven't! They might have won it!
Teammate from Heidelberg United and another local product, Charlie Ankus. How do you feel, Charlie?
A bit nervous, but I think I'll get used to it and really put in 100%.
I'm joined by Will Hastie, the Executive Manager of Football Victoria. Will, thanks for joining me, mate.
Hi, Cotsy. Thank you for having me. It's very exciting.
It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk football with football people, and especially people who've got a story to tell, and most have. You've got an amazing story that involves, obviously, growing up in Melbourne, suburban Melbourne, going through the football pathway. I just made that word up, but we'll go with that for now because it can be controversial, that pathway terminology, can't it?
It can.
Went overseas, played in Europe, played for the Joeys at a World Cup. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. 1989 seems like a lifetime ago, but it also seems just like yesterday.
I can imagine. And also, you've had a host of local clubs that you've played for. I don't think we're going to touch on every club. I'm not going to ask you about your favourite players at every club because we'd get a mini series out of that because you've had a few since you've come back.
The Football Victoria team laugh about the amount of clubs I've had. The Greg Norman analogy comes out quite a bit. So you can imagine at about 3:30 when the banter hits at Football Victoria, that's the one that comes out. So the team at FV will love this.
Lovely. All right. Well, I might stick it to you a bit more a bit later on and give them something to have a laugh about. What we normally do is we go back right to the beginning. So tell me about family life / football life and how it combined early days.
Yeah, growing up in Croydon, it was a very AFL-dominated suburb, really, but just wonderful memories of a street where kids congregated out the front of their houses and just played whatever sport the kids wanted to play that day. So at that time, I think through Australian society, it was quite common for groups of kids to meet just on the road and shout car and everyone to go to the side of the road and let the car through and go back to playing. But it did tend to be AFL in the winter and cricket in the summer. And I loved those times, you know, they were just, you know, fun times. You're outdoors more than you're indoors. And at my school, we didn't even have a football field or a football team. So with a father that was from Scotland and loved the game, it was almost like you went to a secret society every weekend, and it was called the Croydon City Soccer Club. And you met all these people that you didn't see in your everyday life that had a love of the game and loved playing the game. And you'd go back on a Monday morning to school and no one would have any idea what you did for the weekend. So it really was like this sort of underground movement, the football movement, which I've subsequently learned is a very common story for all Australian football players that played through that period, in our northern and western. And so, I mean, the beauty of it was that it really touched every culture. So I found, it was a very sort of white Anglo-Celt, Anglo-Saxon sort of culture in Croydon at the time, but I was very fortunate to experience so many other cultures through football, which I just wouldn't have experienced if I played any other sport, at least not to that extent. So the Super League at the time, which we can probably touch on because that Super League for the juniors was just a fantastic development part of our football education. But, you went to Preston, you went to play Brunswick Juventus, you went down the peninsula and you played Seaford. You went right across the state to play against the best teams at those age levels. And what happened off the field and after the games was, I've subsequently learned in life, was just important to my life as what happened on the field. The cultures in the change rooms, the dance, the food, the smells, all of those were normalised for me as just part of being a Melburnian. And I just feel very fortunate that football gave me that opportunity to experience our city in a way that I think I wouldn't have if I just got stayed in the suburb and maybe played some of the more popular sports in Australia at the time. So yeah, it was very fortunate that I found football and it gave me this great opportunity in life.
Yeah, Dad was a huge influence, but Dad played football. Tell me a little bit about that. Because he wasn't just an influential father who said, "Hey, Croydon's a good place to go and get a taste for it." He'd already had a decent taste for it.
Yeah, he was a footballer in Glasgow, and the irony of Dad was he came to Australia to play football, and I ended up going to Scotland to play football. It was a nice synergy from a father and a son relationship. But yeah, he came out and played with Heidelberg Alexander and Preston Macedonia. And then broke his leg, unfortunately, and pretty much ended his career there. But both Heidelberg and Preston still remember him fondly, and he can still go to those. And that's the beauty of it, when he arrived as a migrant to Australia, football was his community, a carpenter to trade. And I think like all migrants, and that's the same as to this very day, played football, worked on the sites through the day and drove cabs at night to keep things going. And that's just the rich tapestry of our culture and Australian culture, Melbourne culture. So yeah, he played for some of the clubs that I ended up playing for as well, which was a really nice synergy in that father and son relationship. And of course, it was probably just as much his dream as it was my dream to ultimately sign for Celtic back in Glasgow, which was nice. They were nice times.
Absolutely. We'll get to that. So tell me about, obviously, you've mentioned the travelling and the experiences of playing away and all the ethnic clubs, but specifically what was the highlight, or what are the memories of Croydon Soccer Club? As soon as I mention word association, Croydon City Junior Soccer Club, what comes to mind?
Well, we didn't have what we had now in terms of access to the global football environment and 24/7 video of these great footballers coming in from around the world. So my senior football experience was Croydon City Football Club or Croydon City Soccer Club. So the senior team heroes were my heroes. And you didn't have Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi as your hero. You had like Dave Brogan, Graham French, Andy Humble. You know, you had literally Dave Brogan was my favourite player in the world, and we used to finish playing on a Sunday afternoon and then go down and watch the game. You know, like you'd scramble away from your morning junior game and go home and have mum would give you some lunch, and then you couldn't wait to get back in the car to get down and see the Croydon City first team play. And some of the best memories were down at Town Park watching Dobbo and the Croydon senior team play, and they were a fantastic team. You know, they were always in the top sort of three of the then what would have been the then NPL, the state league. And that, like, you know, there was a little crowd behind the goals. It felt like a senior football game. There was atmosphere. All of the other junior teams came down, so you were back down there with your friends. And we talk about this a lot now about trying to develop players, but you would almost spend another afternoon behind the goals kicking the football around with your mates, which is just like another quasi training session, you know. And we don't really see that with kids as much anymore. They were my memories. They were special times, even to the point where you were really hoping that your dad would get stuck talking to someone after the game in the club room, so you could hang around the club rooms and see the players come back in after the game and just get a real sense of what it was like to be in a senior environment. It was just a wonderful place to learn and learn about respect of the senior team and what it took to be a player. And in hindsight, you know, someone could tap you on the shoulder as a 10 or 11-year-old and say, you know, Ian Dobson plays for this team, coaches this team, and it's about as good as it gets in, you know, world football. I mean, Dobbo was just such a great coach and organised and professional and a great tactician, a great strategist. I didn't know that I was kind of watching that sort of football education and probably subconsciously taking a lot of that in. I vividly remember trying things on the weekend that those Croydon senior players, I'd watched those Croydon senior players try the week before in their senior game. You know, little runs or moves or even attitude, sometimes attitudes to opposition players, which was probably a little bit more on the aggressive side with some of those players rather than not. But you certainly were watching every weekend to never take a backward step. To be positive, to be assertive, you know, all of those things were probably subconsciously getting taught to us just by attending those games. So, it was a wonderful environment.
Yeah, it was different times. A little bit older than you, 5 or 6 years older. So I saw those teams up close, but probably more from getting kicked than watching them from where you. But I do especially remember going to soccer games and just, you know, going with your ball. So you're kind of watching, you're kind of playing, you're kind of covering every aspect of, you know, you probably still went in your Croydon gear, or you might have your tracksuit if it was freezing, but you basically didn't change. You might have even still had your boots on because that's what you did. You know what I mean? You basically spent your day that Sunday or the Saturday, whatever it may be, in your kit, including your boots. And that was what it was about. And you didn't want to do anything but be part of that.
No, even to the point where, when they got a new signing, you know, it was no different to new signings overseas now. I remember when they signed Runji as goalkeeper. Now, to me, he was like a Schmeichel-esque presence in the Croydon goal, and he really was such a big, strong presence in the goal. And then this sort of word went around the juniors that we had this massive new goalkeeper, and it was just like what it is when you play a sign overseas now, but localised. I think those are the sorts of things which you'd like to start to recreate a little bit in our modern day football system.
Yeah, local heroes. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And Croydon, don't know how they did it with not a huge support base in terms of supporters, like in numbers, but they constantly had new signings and good signings coming through for what felt like a 10-year period. It might have ended with Dad's Army, with the Jim Tansey, Gary Cole, Kenny Taylor era at the end of it, but they were
You're allowed to say that, Cotsy.
Yeah, I'm allowed to say it. I'll get away with that one. But they were constantly signing good players and turning over a lot of, big names like Runye and you, as you mentioned, Dobbo and, I don't know, like I lost track of it, but they just had success and a sustained success as well, which would have made it easier for a kid watching his team, knowing that they're up near the top of the table, they're consistently winning, and you would have been able to equate that with maybe tying it up with what was in the soccer action at the time. I don't know if you're a soccer action kid, how that went for you.
Well, you had to be, because that's where you read about where your team was on the ladder, and if you were lucky enough to score a goal or the hat-trick heroes. I just said to you prior to recording, I've got a couple of T-shirts. I should have worn my soccer action T-shirt as well. I love that one from Football Cult.
No, it's a good one. I almost went for the hat-trick hero backdrop, but I think I would have blended in and looked like a head in the middle of a big hat-trick certificate. But the hat-trick certificates were good. I've listened to you talk before, maybe we've discussed it, also Shoot Magazine and the influence that had on, well, Shoot Magazine was the equivalent to the internet and Foxtel, wasn't it?
Yeah, I made Mum subscribe to Shoot, and it was one of the best things of the week, going down and picking up the Shoot magazine from the newsagents, usually about a week out of date from
the 3 months.
Yeah, whatever. I just remember it being behind, but you still read that. You consumed it like you were reading the live news as you do when you wake up every morning and pull your phone out and check the overnight results and the latest news from all around Europe, or the world. But yeah, hidden in those pages as a kid was you had to create the atmosphere in your own head. You could only sort of imagine what a professional footballer's life might be like, what it was like inside venues, what those games were like, and you created those things inside your own mind, and for me that was an important part of the visualization of what it was I wanted to participate in at some point in my career if I was ever fortunate enough to. So yeah, Mum, if Mum let that subscription to Shoot drop, then she was in big trouble.
I can imagine. Maybe because I'm a bit older, when I was getting it at, say, that 12, 13, 14, there was a 3-month gap, because they used to come by boat. Eventually, later on, maybe through your time, they started speeding up, and then they started flying them out. So you weren't getting such a huge delay. Maybe it was only a week or two, which was, I remember by that stage, I was getting a bit older, but it was still phenomenal to actually get it without last season's results, because that was ridiculous. But I used to get my newsagent to put mine aside with the soccer action, and then walk in and go straight to the counter, and he'd pull it out like I was some special VIP. But there was never any fear of Shoot or soccer action being sold out in Sunshine. But I just felt really special that both of mine were kept under the counter, like in a folder, and I was some sort of VIP, and you didn't have to go and get it from the shelf yourself. That was my memory.
The opposite. It was never going to get ordered in unless you put it on order. So it was definitely not going to get sold out. They didn't stock the shelves with them, did they?
No, definitely not. No. Look, great memories. I love the soccer action. Love the Shoot magazine and the posters. I've still got my scrapbooks, and unfortunately, instead of keeping the magazines, I used to cut them up and paste them in the old scrapbook. But I've still got the scrapbook, so that's the main thing. But great memories. Junior footy. At what point did you start to break into the regional squads? Because there would have been regional squads first, and then which was the pathway. There's that word again. To getting into state squads. So let me know, at what point were you starting to break into the regionals?
Yeah, I'm pretty certain it was under 12s, the first regional squad came up. I went through a pretty linear Australian football pathway at that time, from 12 to 16. You went from Croydon, Super League, regionals, and then obviously into state and funneled through into the national program. But again, we've just sort of changed some of the NPL boys competition quite significantly. And it's interesting you ask about regionals, because it was with regionals in mind that we took the junior boys NPL back to a north, south, east and west qualification phase. We kind of, to use the Jonathan Wilson term, inverted the pyramid a little bit, and got ourselves back to what the essence of what we were trying to capture with regionals at the time through our development. And a lot of that came from our football competition review, where we had Simon Colosimo, Josip Skoko, a lot of the players that had been through it. We asked them what it was that was special about their development as players. And the regionals came up every single time, because it was the sort of first time when you got out of the safety and the security of your club environment into a more testing environment that had selection processes and put you under just that extra pressure as an elite player, or a more developed or a more advanced player, whatever it was at that point in time. And then you played this wonderful tournament over a couple of weeks against all the other regions. And within those days were special moments. You know, you played 2 games a day, and the sitting around waiting between games, they're all special bonding times about what it takes to be a player, and what it means to, you know, pull up for a second game in a day, even though you're a bit sore, and then front up again the following day. And so that funneling of the regionals was a very important part of players of those days' development. And I think trying to recreate that tier in some form is very important as a catch-all on the journey from club to what you might call genuinely elite. At the moment, we sort of have this: if you're in NPL, you're elite, and if you're not in NPL, you're not elite. And that's not nuanced enough for the practicalities of the development of a player. You know, there's times when you're just at different phases of the journey, and some players may take a little bit more time to develop. Other players may develop early, pause, and then need to develop again a little bit later. So, I do think the regional tier is a part of our pathway that we're missing, and we can recreate in a more modern, appropriate way for the current system.
Funnily enough, with quite a few people I've spoken to have pointed back to that, and it seems to be, you know, the general consensus that might help with the dirty word of pathway. But at what point did you realise then that you were getting, obviously you had good regional tournaments, starting to get selected in state squads? Did you have to trial, or was it just straight into the state squad? What was it like at that time for you?
Yeah, Tommy Newbigin, rest his soul, was the designated Vic coach for that age level at that time. He would select a squad of about 60, and they would come down to Dendy Park on a Saturday morning. And again, another important step, because Dendy Park hasn't changed a bit. You can go down there today and see how vast the fields are, and Brighton Soccer Club's the biggest community club in the state. There's 1,800 odd players down there every weekend and every night through the winter training. It's a wonderful place. But you'd get down there, and then you would have you'd have Tim White running his group, and you'd have all the other state coaches. So I could look across the fields and you could see Trimmers or John Markovsky or all the players that were just a year ahead of me or a couple of years ahead of me. And it really let you as a 12, 13-year-old kind of see what it was going to look like. You know, if you could stay on this journey, you could look across the field and literally see the quality of the other players. And it was hard to focus on your own training sometimes, because you would kind of see these wonderful players just doing stuff that you would go, and again, another part of, well, if they can do that, then I'm going to have to practice to get myself to the level where they could do that, even just mucking around before training, you know, little tricks and keepy uppies and catching on the back of your neck. All that stuff was, I remember watching Bobby McLaughlin at a clinic one day catch the ball on the back of his neck, and I thought to myself, man, I don't know how you do that, you know, like I just don't know how you do that. And then, you know, within 2 weeks of of daily practicing. You could do it yourself. All of these things teach you the innate skills that you need to be really good at what you do. And that Dendy Park moment every Saturday, you couldn't get out of bed quick enough to get down there, Cotsy. You know, like it was just a hive of some really wonderful football players and great coaches that just loved helping the next generation of kids. So you can imagine the coaching staff that was down there. You know, Tony Dunkley, just legends.
Cream of the
legends.
crop. Yep.
Oh, yeah, and what a wonderful environment to learn in. We'll get to. I'm sure we're going to get to Celtic, but you know, I look back and then go, I went overseas and there was nothing better than that. You know, we were very, very fortunate to have that as 12, 13, 14-year-olds in Victoria, and at the time I thought there was something better overseas. You know, but the truth was there really wasn't. You know, we were very fortunate to have that foundation.
Yeah, it sounds like you were living the dream already, but you probably weren't realising how good it was.
Absolutely, I still thought there was something better. You know, but from a youth development point of view, you know, and we'll get onto it. But you know, the next phase of that in our pathway at the time was Dr. Ron Smith, Dr. Smudger at the AIS. And VIS hadn't started then, but you had Ernie and Ian Greener running the VIS. I mean, you just look at the quality of the coaching that our kids got access to, and it was world class. Yeah,
absolutely. At what point did the opportunity, or how was the next step into the national Joey's? How did that come about? What was the process? Sorry.
Sort of fortunate that I fell in a year age level wise that aligned with the under-16 FIFA World Cup in '89. So from the nationals at under-15s, Vic Dalglish was the national coach at the time, and Vic started to get a sort of squad of about 40, 50 together himself about a year and a half out. And we spent a bit of time in Sydney, a couple of times at the AIS in Canberra, in preparation for what that squad might have landed like and looked like for the qualifiers in January of 1989. The Oceania qualifiers, they were held up at in New South Wales. And from there, it just sort of, you know, I think at that level, I probably felt a little bit out of my depth when I first went in. It's probably not uncommon for players to sort of go, you know, should I really be at this level? So I think I was fortunate that we had a couple of national titles in a year to really get used to it and feel like you belonged.
Yeah.
Because I think that was when I sort of thought, wow, you know, this might just get serious, and being a professional player may actually be something you can do. You know, you always dreamed of it, but it started to become a little bit real when those teams started to get together and play together, and you would see some of the quality. I mean, that team, you know, some of the players in that team, you went on to be the golden generation essentially, you know, and some of the players left out of that team, you know, was probably just as interesting as some of the players that made it, you know. So
absolutely. Why did you think you didn't fit in? Were you selling yourself short in hindsight, or were you intimidated by being in that company? What was it goes through a young kid's mind at that stage?
I think a little bit of self-doubt. There is a bit of intimidation. You know, you'd never want to admit it, because there was a sort of bravado that you kind of had to hold on to be confident enough to survive.
Yeah.
I'm pleased that, these days that gets unpacked a lot more. Like, there was no such thing as a Joey's under-16 sports psychologist, or you never felt that you could go to anyone really and talk about vulnerability. You had to keep it behind closed doors. You had to deal with it in isolation. And any of the sort of self-confidence issues that you might have had, you had to work through yourself. But to be honest, I couldn't have even spoken to my father about that sort of stuff, like, it really was just the culture of that day would have been, well, toughen up, son, and go out and assert yourself. That would have been the level of the discussion that you would have had in that time. So you just had to really, the more you played and the more you worked out that, I can actually compete at this level, it dissipates. But I'm pleased that through the PFA and just through general society, we do have other avenues for young players and players in general to talk about some of those vulnerabilities. I mean, if you can imagine that team, in the end, the state teams sort of get selected a little bit around clusters or groups of players from the successful clubs.
Yep.
And that's just pretty natural, So the club that was successful in New South Wales was Sydney United, Sydney, Croatia. And that had Popovic, Kalats, Babic. I think everyone will remember Mark Babic, just a fantastic central defender.
Yep. So the spine of the team's coming from one club, effectively.
Equally, I mean, and Popper wouldn't have any problems with me saying he's equally as good as Popper through that journey. So you had these two 6'2", 6'3", Sydney, Croatia central defenders, and a 9'27", whatever Spider is, goalkeeper, and then of course about 700 metres up the road's a guy called Schwarzer in goals for Marconi at Sydney United. So that Western Sydney, which is the heartland of a lot of Australian football talent, you'd walk into the room and there was just land of the giants, and they were strong and strong, dominating characters, just really, really talented, strong individuals, which was very much the Australian mentality, very much the foundation of so much of our success. The belief these guys entered the room with, whether I've never actually been able to talk to them to say, was it ever put on or was it just true? But in all honesty, the strength of character, it just couldn't have been put on, it was just natural. They were natural leaders, and they've gone on and had careers that'll tell you that it definitely wasn't put on. Their strength, their belief, their commitment to training, their talent just stood the test of time. And when you enter those sorts of change rooms in the first time, it's probably natural to be just a little bit intimidated by it,
Yeah, of course, by the presence of the others, but then you quickly need to become part of it if you want to stay on, exist, and fit in. Simple as that.
That's right. Yeah, and that's what forms the bond as a team.
All right. So you had this little Oceania tournament, which for the juniors would have been all held in the one area and through a short, maybe a week or something like that. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, over about 5 days, and it was one of those ones where it was 24-0 against Vanuatu, and some of the higher scores. But then it came down to the usual, the game against New Zealand. Final day, they'd won all their games, we'd won all our games. So it was kind of a nice sort of grand final, winner takes all scenario on the final day. And it was actually a really sort of tense game for the first half, and then we went away with it. I think we ended up I think it was like 5-2 or something like that in the end, which probably looked a little more than it was for the tension and the game. But one of my favourite games to have played in, because at the end of that, it meant that we were off to Scotland and going to go to a World Cup. Obviously, at that point, you weren't selected in the team, but that didn't matter at that point. We just knew that we were off to a World Cup, and the next stage for us to try and show the world that we were good enough to be professional players. And I've actually got this great photo from that day. I was looking through them the other day, and the team's actually just walking off the field, and you can sort of see the mouths open and the hands up, and the singing that was going on, and it was just a fantastic day.
Absolutely. So at this stage, you're at 16, or you're still 15. Had you moved to Heidelberg yet?
Yeah, I moved to Heidelberg in the last year. The year before that, mainly because Jimmy Rooney took over as assistant coach to Tans at Heidelberg, and Jimmy was Vic Douglas's assistant coach. So yeah, Jimmy had a massive part in my career through that time as well.
In what way?
Sorry?
In what way?
Oh, look, Jimmy picked me up from home and drove me to training at a start. So I spent, about half an hour in the car with him getting across to Olympic Village for that sort of 9 months. But he would spend some time with me in particular, just working on some midfield related skills that he was just a genius at. And I think everybody can picture Jimmy in that sort of crouched position, protecting the ball. I've watched a little bit of Jimmy's stuff, and I don't even really need to, because to this day when he plays, he can still get into that position and no one can get him off the ball. But he was impossible for his size and stature. He was impossible to get off the ball. So what he taught me was it didn't matter how tall, how strong, how physically imposing you were. Mind you, Jimmy's as strong as a Mallee Bull, obviously, but you could get yourself in a position where you can't get knocked off the ball. That was important for a junior going into senior football, because you know what it's like. The minute a junior goes into senior football, you can get ragdolled a bit, or you can get just knocked off the ball too easily and the like. And so Jimmy's ability to retain possession, retain control of the ball and find an outlet as a midfielder was really important for me through that time. And it actually came to mind. I was fortunate to go to the 2010 World Cup and see Spain play twice at that World Cup. And I couldn't believe how small Xavi and Iniesta were up live. You know, they are tiny, tiny players, and they could not get knocked. You couldn't knock them off the ball. And it reminded me of Jimmy's positioning on the field and on the ball, that those guys were experts at it. So Jimmy must have popped into Barcelona and coached them for a little bit.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, he must have.
It's funny, when I go down the curriculum discussion, this is the second interview over a period of time. The other one was Charlie Ankos, who used to catch the train from Altona to Flinders Street when he was at Heidelberg. And then Jimmy would pick him up at traffic lights and corner of Flinders and Swanson or whatever it was, and then they would drive in the car together. Now, that's two of you that have sat in the car for long periods of time with Jimmy Rooney and gone on to have stellar football careers and then after football careers. So I reckon we bin the curriculum and we just get Jimmy Rooney to pick people up, especially young players, and spend a little bit of time, and we'll get our footballers back. We'll get it developing the footballers a way that they should be, because it seemed to work in Jimmy Rooney's car. Surely that's got to tell us something. Let's tap into those old Socceroos, or you know what I mean?
I like it, Cotsy, but football Uber.
Absolutely.
Jimmy Rooney.
Well, you tap into anyone. Like if you sit in the car with Jimmy Campbell, there's a good chance if you're an attacking midfielder, you might learn how to make late runs into the box and score goals on a regular basis and be the 5th all-time scorer in the NSL from playing in midfield. You might sit in the car with Steve Blair, and if you get him on a bad day, he won't say a word, but if you get him on his chatty day, you might actually learn how to tackle and close down a forward for 90 minutes. It's a wasted lot of resources. Just something I picked up on doing interviews. But anyway, we've digressed.
No, I think there's something in that, Cotsy, and great mentors and how people can contribute back into the game is very, very important. I think it's something we've got to look at. I've always said that the pathway, whatever that pathway is, because everybody takes a different path. No one takes one true pathway in football. It's impossible. But it's just as important on the way up as it is on the way down. And even up and down doesn't really make a lot of sense, because there's not really a position below any other position. It's just a place in football at any given point in time.
Yeah.
Your place in football is important. I've learned that. I've learned that being involved in a community club at the very grassroots is just as satisfying as being a professional football player.
Yeah.
It's hard to beat walking down to a field and just seeing it full of kids laughing, enjoying the noises, the smells of the grass, enjoying the game. And the more we can get our great football people, our great women and men engaging at that level of the game, the healthier the system will be, the more that kids will play, which means the more opportunity that there'll be for kids to go up the funnel into the elite side of the game and ultimately be Matildas and Socceroos. So, yeah, I think every football system probably in the world struggles with what it is you want your great football people to do post-retirement. And it gets a bit disappointing that some leave a little bit bitter, or some aren't. Some just aren't sure about what role they can play in the football ecosystem or the football world. And I think the game can show some leadership in helping re-engage with that, because the only way we're going to win in Australia and be competitive against, AFL and some of the other sporting codes is to fully utilise the wonderful resources and talent that we've got in our game.
Absolutely. All right, so you moved to Heidelberg. Sorry, I went off on a rant there with the Jimmy story, but I love Jimmy. So Jimmy Tansey was always there. Did that mean you got a sniff at some senior footy there at a young age, or what was the go?
No, I never really got that chance, mainly because I'm 16 at the time, and the tournament was in May in Scotland. So I think from memory, I only really remember doing a pre-season and a couple of early, like I remember really sort of hard grounds and hot conditions. So it just must have been the first 2 or 3 rounds of that year that I was around the club. And then we were whipped off to sort of camp in Sydney, and I didn't really play anymore. So aside from some famous Tans doggies and pre-season, I don't think I got too much of a look in on the first team. I was pleased that I could keep up in the fitness session. That was about it.
No, very good. All right, so exciting times. You're off to a World Cup with the Joeys, going to Scotland. When did you find out you were in the squad, the final squad?
Well, it was the old letter. You got a letter sent to you from the old Soccer Australia, and it was on the old sort of typeface. And yeah, you opened up the letter, and then I do think it was actually published in the paper the following day. So yeah, you kind of got to get twofold. You got the trepidation of opening the letter, and then the thrill of it being a good news story. I had a bad one with that for the under-20 squad, but that
we get to that.
That's the good and the bad of it, and then you get to read your name in the paper, which when you're 15 always feels a bit special.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now you gave me a tip. I spoke to Ray Gatt. About your journey over. By the time this goes to air, Gatty's version of the story will have already gone to air. But give me your version. You're in Colombo. You're I'm assuming it's a stopover on the way to Glasgow.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Yeah, these are the things that probably never get told, and I think you've always got to sort of think about them. That you're going in, young kids are going to other cultures and other environments, and travelling into areas that they're not necessarily used to. But on our way to Amsterdam, we were due for a 5-day pre-camp in Amsterdam prior to the tournament. We were flying KLM, and KLM stopped in Colombo, and we got out of the airport in Colombo. We were only meant to be in transit. And then I looked up at the board and saw delayed. And it's never a good look. Anyone that's travelled, you know, we've all done that trip to Europe. Anytime you see delayed, it's kind of like, this ain't good. And it stayed at delayed for 10 hours. And there was and we were just a sort of bunch of 16-year-olds, but you can imagine some of the transit lounges and that, like, there was no seats. So we were kind of strewn out on sort of hard tiled floors, leaning up against walls. You know, there's no mobile phones, there's no anything. So we're just sort of hanging around talking. And then they updated us that it would be a 30-hour delay, and they had to take us out of the airport to hotels. And I don't know if anyone's ever been through that, but that in itself caused a lot of distress for all the travellers, because nobody had visas and nobody had permission to enter the country. So this whole process had to go on at customs. That there was a lot of anxious people, you know, a lot of kids and parents that were struggling. So, you know, Vic and the adults or the leadership of our group just told us to pause and wait and help and do everything you can. So we were just trying to help. Yeah. And we were the last to go. So we'd been hanging around for about 20 hours. By the time we got to the hotel and had a shower, they basically told us to get back on the bus and get back because the plane was ready to go again. And we were pretty tired and distressed ourselves on reflection. But there was obviously other travellers that had been suffering a little more than us. And as we walked back in through security check, I remember just getting my bag off the security scanning machine. I was standing next to Ross Aloisi, and I looked up about 2 stories above us on a banister. There was someone that ultimately was a passenger on our plane, just swinging from the top of the banister. And we sort of thought it was almost like a circus act, a little bit like acrobatics. They're kind of swinging and holding by his legs, and then just fell in front of us and hit onto what were concrete tiles, landed on his head. And I'll just never forget the sound, the bounce, and then the shriek. And I turned white seemingly, and I turned to Ross, and Ross was white, and we didn't speak. We didn't have any words. And then next thing I know, these 2 arms came around Ross and I, and it was Gaddy. It was Ray Gatt. Gaddy was travelling with us as the official journalist. A young Ray Gatt was travelling with us as the official journalist, and he took the adult role at that point. He was like our fatherly figure, and put his arm around us and just walked us off to the side and just sat down and had a little chat with us about what we'd just seen and what it meant. And unfortunately, the person passed away, and there was a lot of commotion, obviously, around that individual, as you could imagine. And to this day, you know, every time I see Ross and every time I see Gaddy, we can never forget that moment. And you know, you just sometimes these things happen when you go on tours to other countries, and you know, those were the sort of things the team sort of had to cope with in the lead up to that World Cup. The leadership group, Michael Douglas was our physio. They did a great job of just working through it with us and helping us sort of put that into perspective, and then try to focus on a tournament that was you know, for us the most important thing in our lives at the moment. But of course, it seemed like the most important thing of your life, but when you see something like that, it all gets put into perspective. So yeah, just something that we'll never forget, but something that I guess sort of bonds us a little bit for forever, because we sort of were together and worked through it.
That's a lot of drama in one little stopover, right? Transit lounge, effectively. The whole bloody movie happened.
I look forward to seeing what Ray's version of it was, because was it similar?
Yeah, very similar. Both of you mentioned the fact that Ross Aloisi turned white, which for any Aloisi turning white, anyone who knows Australian football, it must have been an experience, because those boys were born tanned, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. No, you'll never. Well, thankfully and hopefully, you never have to see Ross turning white again. And yeah, we can talk about some of those characters, but yeah, I played with Roscoe and Muskie, and I think you would have played with a lot of those sort of characters as well, George. But some of the nicest people you'll ever meet off the field. So their public or on-field persona never matches what they're like.
White line fever is not something to be. It's not a negative thing. I find it a positive thing that you can switch on and switch off when and if you need it. It's a strength. It's a skill. It's an asset if you use it correctly. And those two boys you just mentioned knew how to use it. Okay, so let's get to the World Cup. You're based in Aberdeen.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. Come on, 16-year-old boy, 15-year-old boy representing his country at it's only the third under 16/under 17 World Cup, so it's still fresh. You're on the world stage. Got your green and gold tracksuit. You've got the special bag that comes with it. You've got through Colombo and Amsterdam, and now you're in Aberdeen, ready to go. Talk me through what's going through the mind of a young fella now.
Look, it was unbelievable, and we even got to meet Pele in the lead up to the first game. So, like all of a sudden it was, you kind of, it sort of felt a bit rock starry, beautiful, like just the bus you got on to transport you around training venues. And that was like, decked out in, Australia on the side of it, and FIFA under 16 World Cup. I remember Coke on tap because Coke was a sponsor. So it's probably not the best thing to happen for 16-year-olds, but, unlimited supply of the sponsor's product, meeting Pele, and then, we couldn't have drawn a harder group. It was unbelievable, the group we drew. We had Brazil, we had East Germany, the USA and Australia, and all of those teams were champions of their FIFA region. So all four champions were drawn in the same group together. So it wasn't an easy group. The group of death, I think we'll call it, Cotsy.
We'll go with that.
But yeah, I remember our first training session in Aberdeen, and Brazil were training on the field next to us. And it's the first time I've ever seen, that sort of Portuguese influenced South American dancing where the players put their hands on each other's shoulders and sort of dance from one side of the field to the other. And I remember looking at it just thinking, oh my word, I don't, my first thought was, how do you beat that? Like, this synchronicity and the chanting and the clapping, and like the Australian under 16 team had never had our arms around each other dancing in sync from one side of the field to the other, So the beauty of it was just the differences in preparation and the differences in training techniques and being, having your eyes open to just a whole new world of football culture was quite amazing. And yeah, it's probably, there's been a few highlights, but that whole couple of weeks leading into that tournament and playing through that tournament's definitely one of the highlights that I'll always remember.
Just when you think Croydon and visiting every state league club and junior club along the way has introduced you to all these cultures, you go all the way to Scotland, and then you get the Portuguese and the Brazilian samba, and you think it's another world. It's just something you've never seen again.
Yeah. And the irony of it is, I subsequently learned that was even foreign to Scotland, right? It happened in Scotland. There was no one dancing from side to side on a field in Scotland either. So
no, not unless they were doing Jinky Johnson impersonations.
Yeah, that's right. That was, I think that was born out natural talent that didn't come from the Brazilian samba. I can tell you, it was fantastic.
No, good. All right, so it was a hard group and you didn't progress, so that's fine. But obviously you played, and fair to say having that World Cup there was how Celtic cottoned on to you. Is that the way it went through?
Yeah, that's right. I ended up not coming home and trialling with Celtic and signing with Celtic. And, for anyone that sort of knows me and my family, as I said, that was probably as much as a dream for my father as it was for me. I had pictures of Celtic players on my bedroom wall. Paul McStay, Charlie Nicholas were two favourites of mine. Paul actually lives in Australia, in Sydney now.
He does, yeah.
We're still friends. He's a wonderful. If you had said to me, you're going to call Paul McStay a friend in the future, that would have been it for me. Just an amazing player. Anyone ever saw Paul play, and he was a midfielder similar to me, and I like to modify my game, model my game on Paul. So, for me, it was probably no other decision that could have been made at that time. If they wanted me to sign and that was kind of it, I was really no other choice.
Yep.
There was some interest to trial at Anderlecht and Arsenal as well at that time. And, sometimes you look back in hindsight and say, might have they been better development environments for me? But the truth is there was really no other choice for me to make in that moment at that time. And you can only sort of reflect on that after a couple of years of going through that next phase of your career. So, it was the realisation of the dream, really. Like that was the real. I was 16 years of age and had realised my football dream all of a sudden. And it was just a fantastic time.
What was the first thing you noticed from a football point of view, the difference? Say you had a sniff of it at Heidelberg, you'd had a taste of it at the national under-16 level. Now you're going to a professional club overseas. What's the very first thing you noticed as a difference? Or was there any difference for that matter?
Well, that's what I was alluding to a little bit earlier. The thing I think I struggled with most was it actually wasn't better. It wasn't better. And I think I spent the first couple of years hoping it'd get a little better. But for anyone that's sort of been in Scotland, because of the conditions, weather-wise, a lot of the football wasn't even played on grass. So we were on like red ash, which is kind of like sort of tennis courts here, training and playing. And I couldn't get my head around it. I mean, I talked about Dendy Park with the state teams. Dendy Park was this immaculate grass surface, couch grass near the beach, sandy, beautiful to play football on. And then you're at Celtic Football Club on red ash, and if you fall over, half your leg gets ripped off. Like it was sort of hard to compute. And even little things like additional sessions or an environment to go and work on right foot, left foot, all of that, none of it existed. And I found myself having to create those things for me, not necessarily it being supported through the club. It was really, Alex Ferguson actually talks about this when he first went to Manchester United. The culture was really one training session and then get in the shower and get into your cars and get home as quick as you can with professional footballers through the UK at that time. So often you'd be home at 1 o'clock and just have way too much time on your hands for the rest of the day, when really, I think some of the continental approaches, you'd be back for a second session and you'd be working on aspects of your game that need some development. So, yeah, for me, it probably wasn't as professional as I was hoping that it'd be. But notwithstanding that, it was an amazing environment. Like weekend games were, like Parkhead was just a phenomenal. There was nothing like Parkhead in Australia. That atmosphere, the tension, the media interest, that side of the professionalism. I'm sort of talking more about developing a young player rather than the genuine professionalism of media and TV and crowds and the buzz.
Yeah.
So, there was nothing in Australia could have delivered the education of that sort of thrill. That to this day, it's the best football atmospheres I've ever seen have been inside Parkhead.
Yeah.
You know,
So,
it's going to make.
so the football at first team level, and in terms of, so almost as a fan, it's the top of the pops, right? So you can go and have an experience and it leaves you with lifelong memories, and like you said, nothing compares to it. But from a footballing point of view and a developer's point of view, it left a lot to be desired, right? And that's clearly stuff that through your journey, I'm picking up that you're collecting all this information, maybe not deliberately at the time, but it's going to help you in later life with your job at the PFA, in the job that you're doing right now. You're picking up all this added information along the journey that's going to help you make decisions and improve things for others, which is really important, and why it's so important for football people to be in football roles. You don't have to comment on that. I've just made the comment for you. But it is important because you've been through the journey and you've experienced it and seen it firsthand. And you can walk away with those two different perspectives, which are Parkhead, watching Celtic, amazing, nothing like it, best thing till I die in terms of a football fan. But from a footballer going overseas, clearly they could do things or could have done things a lot better, and maybe they have since then. But it wasn't a great environment for you as a 16-year-old to go and develop yourself, was it?
No, not at all, and they certainly have since then. I wish I could go there now. Their training facility, their academy, their whole process, like most things, has been completely transformed. I got to see it a couple of years ago. Willie McStay is back there as their youth coach, and it's fantastic. So no doubt, 30 years on, it's almost scary to say it, but yeah, it would be a good development place to go now. I'm pleased. Well, I know Arzani was there last year. I'm not sure where Daniel is now, but Tommy Rogic has done really fantastic stuff there, and I think there's a couple of other young Australians in the system there. Look, there's no problem now. In fact, I played football at just an amazing time. It was right at the early 90s where the pivot to some of these changes in professionalism and stratospheric salaries for players went off the charts in the space of about 5 years as Murdoch took over the EPL and really found the latent value that was in the game, and players started to really benefit from that at the top echelon. There's always players that struggle for salaries and payments below it, but at the top echelon, Paul and some of the best players at Celtic were sort of £1,000 a week players. And you say that now, and you look back on it, it went from sort of £1,000 to £1,200 a week to £30,000 a week in about 5 years. It just, the whole thing blew up professionally. Wenger came into Arsenal, Ferguson to United, and they literally, took chips out of cafeterias and put steamed veg in, and all these things that are just quite common now weren't there. They just weren't there at the late 80s, early 90s. So you're spot on, Cotsy. I think in hindsight, and I would have only have known this in hindsight, so I didn't make the wrong decision, but I also had an opportunity to go to the AIS with Ron at that time. And for a 16-year-old, that would have been the best environment to go and develop in for 2 years, rather than the sort of brutal hard edge of the professional game in Europe for a 16-year-old. But notwithstanding that, you're right. I was picking up information all along, which has actually helped me so much more in my post-football career than I could have imagined, and that's just as important as your actual career. So yeah, none of it went to waste.
No, it's part of the journey.
Yeah, and I certainly have to say I was very, very fortunate. The best thing that happened for me in Scotland was getting to meet my Scottish family. And they became my family off the field when I went over there. If I didn't have them, then, I wouldn't have survived. I would have been a lost little soul from Melbourne, toughing it out in Glasgow, which, is it's a wonderful city. But not the easiest place for a kid born and brought up in Melbourne without any family or friends around. So, yeah, I was very lucky to meet my family and become sort of I lived with them for a period of time, and they looked after me through that time. So yeah, I mean, might not have been the best for football development, but certainly an important part of my development.
Still an experience that many would kill for. So it didn't work out at Celtic in terms of first team football. You would have played a lot of youth team and some reserve team football. I'm not going to fast track it too much, but I do really want to spend some time on Sligo Rovers. So why did you end up at Dundee and Kilmarnock? How did that process take part?
Oh, look, it was probably the more interesting story from Australian point of view was I thought I was doing pretty well. I really struggled first year at Celtic, and I thought I was doing well second year. I'd settled in, I'd lost my homesickness. I kind of worked through that early phase of not feeling like I belonged, and I thought I was doing really well. But in tandem with that, Les Scheinflood was selecting his team, the famous team that went to Portugal for the 20s. Yeah. And I had been in that team that qualified for that tournament. So I'd played in Fiji in the summer before that as part of that team. So I really wanted to be in that side. But I was torn between thinking that I still had an opportunity at Celtic and not. So I didn't really come home for any of the sort of pre-training. I was probably the only one. Bozza was the other one playing at Villa at the time. I was actually at United at the time, I think, and sort of fell off the radar probably a little bit. And then Celtic, I'll never forget, Tommy Craig came in and said, look, we're letting you go, but Dundee want to sign you. And I said, I don't want to go to Dundee. I want to stay at Celtic. And so, I'm probably 18 by this stage. I don't have an agent. I'm sitting in this room with Billy McNeil, the Caesar of Celtic, and Tommy Craig, and I'm told that you're going to Dundee. And I just can't compute it because all I'm thinking of is I just wanted to stay here. And if I had known I was going to Dundee, I would have shot back home to try and be a bit more prominent for the Australian under-20 team. May or may not have made it, but, I would have spent a bit more time back in Australia with the squad that was preparing for that tournament, rather than worrying about going to Dundee at the time. And so I'd scrambled. I literally left the office and got on a plane and came home and got on the phone to Les and Raul Blanco and said, I'm back, can I train? And they were really good. They said no problem. But it was only 2 weeks before that squad was getting selected. So I had a couple of training sessions. I felt like I was home. I felt like I was back with the lads. Felt good. Felt like I developed in a year. But in hindsight, I'd probably left that run too late. And to go back to that letter that arrives from Soccer Australia, the letter arrives and I open it and I scan down the first 18 names and I'm not in it. And I keep reading and keep reading. I read the 18 names another 5 times. I still can't find my name in it. And I'm number 20. I'm 20 of 18, second emergency. And, I've still got that letter, by the way, because you look down this... You look down this squad and, I mean, seriously, even to be player 20 in that squad's just an amazing achievement. Some of the names in that squad are football royalty in Australia. So whilst that didn't, I just lay on my bed and cried, to be honest. That didn't really help me at the time. But you look back now and you sort of say, look, mate, what a squad, what an achievement. And that was probably my most difficult winter because it was the first time where SBS sort of beamed that tournament in live. So here I was sitting watching them all go so well, and I was so pleased for friends, but of course sitting at home wondering what might have been. That was probably the first massive disappointment that I'd had, and it came twofold within the space of about 2 weeks. Let go by Celtic and not making that under-20 side, and I had to really reflect on what it was I wanted at that point. I shot back over. I had a 6-week trial at Ipswich. Felt that I did well, but nothing going at the end of 6 weeks, which, by the way, a 6 weeks trial is a pretty long trial. So, obviously every week they were giving me an indication that things were good. And then 6 weeks later said no. By that time, the English football season had started. So most squads in England had been settled. I spent 4 weeks at Sunderland did okay there, but they sort of said we don't really have any places for 18-year-olds, and then finally my good mate Lockie Armstrong was at Dundee at the time, so I kind of finally had to have a mea culpa and thought, well, Lockie's up there, me and Lockie can live together, which would be which would be helpful because we were best mates playing through the system here in Australia. My dad's family friends with Jimmy, so we've known each other since we were kids, and I thought it'd be a good time to hang with Lockie and see if we could redevelop our football careers together. So
how did that go?
I think the thing, I don't know if anybody knows this about Lock, but Lock had actually made the first team at Dundee by that time and was going fantastically well. And what happened was we went okay for that year. We were still reserve team players. We were enjoying ourselves. It was, you're full-time footballers and you still think that you're going to go off on a journey. Lockie came home that year, signed for Sunshine George Cross on loan and did his knee, right? And I think what happened was that I lost Lockie when I went back to Dundee because he didn't come back for a year. He stayed here and had the operation and recovered. Really, really tough for Lock. He was really on the cusp of the first team at Dundee, and then in a Victorian Premier League game on loan with Sunshine George Cross, literally, like his knee was really bad. ACL and cartilage and the whole thing. Couldn't believe it. So when I went back, Lockie wasn't there. It just didn't quite feel the same place. Having said that, I did meet a lifelong friend, a guy called Ivo Den Beeman, who played in the first team at Dundee and became a very close friend of mine. I lived with him. He's a Dutchman, and to this day we still stay in touch. So at every part you go to, there's always something that comes out of it that influences you for the rest of your life. But no, that ended. So that sort of came to an end that Christmas time, and I was done. I kind of said, this sort of lifestyle, and I'm just going to go home, and I think it might be time to go back to uni and study a little bit and play and sort of play back home and see where it'll take me from there. And just as I was about to leave, Willie McStay took the job at Sligo, gave me a phone call and said, "Do you fancy coming over here on your way home?" That's sort of how the Sligo journey began.
Yeah. What, in terms of comparison to Scottish football, where does that league? What's the standard? What's the difference? How much of a difference?
Yeah, I think it's probably a Scottish Division 1 in truth. Scottish football gets a little blurred, doesn't it? I certainly don't want to disrespect the Scottish Premier League. There's fantastic players playing there, but you do sort of have Celtic and Rangers off at a higher level. I think when those two clubs are at their best, they're actually English Premier League clubs. Yeah. So you sort of have this disparity of standard with those two clubs that shoot off. Celtic and Rangers wouldn't be out of place playing Man United or Tottenham or Arsenal every other week at Parkhead. And if they did, and they had access to that television money to replenish their squads and keep their squads at the same talent levels, they would compete.
Absolutely.
At that. But it's probably upper end of Scottish Division 1. Ireland's been interesting. Like all countries, Ireland went through an economic boom in the late 90s and had some fantastic players. They were paying good wages. There's some good crowds in Ireland, and it was a place that wasn't a bad place for a professional footballer to be. Little similar here in that, if you were a good Irish player, you'd want to end up in England or in Europe somewhere. But you could still have a pretty good career playing the League of Ireland, and you got great crowds and good media coverage. It sort of felt very much like there was a professional environment around it all. So, but yeah, I think it's probably at a Scottish Division 1 level with one or two teams that might have been a bit better than that.
What was the lifestyle like?
Well, Willie created something really fantastic for us. So, you know, we're back just to being a professional football player. Albeit we had a couple of players in our team that were local lads and part-time.
Yeah.
So what it would be was, it was sort of two daily sessions and 2 evening sessions would sort of be how our week would go. But, you know, the club had an arrangement with a local hotel that had gym facilities and pool facilities and the like. So every other day we would just be down there doing a gym session or a non-football related session. But yeah, it was fantastic. And, you know, the Irish people and the town was just, you know, I only signed a 1-month contract, Cotsy, and I was still there 3 years later. So yeah, it was just a special place.
Clearly. What was it like finally getting some regular first team football and getting some continuity and finally doing, because ultimately youth team reserves, it's always, you know, you're always looking ahead. You're always trying to say, am I going to get in? Why aren't I being chosen? What do I have to do? This bloody coach, this bloody manager, and all of a sudden get a run at it. What's the mindset? How's that?
Yeah, that was it. That was when you felt like you'd sort of made it. It just, and it really did give you another boost. I think it helped your game, your attitude, your belief that you could compete at that level. You know, when it got serious, you know, the first 3 months at Sligo, we got relegated. So it was all real, you know, crowds booing, you know, people not very happy with you down the town through the week, all those aspects that happen when you play professional football, all of a sudden emerged. And I think that was the best part about it. The games mattered. Whereas when you're playing reserve football or youth football, there isn't really consequence for the outcome of the game. But when you get to a senior level with fans and media and there's interest in it, whether it's good or bad, it matters, and what you do matters. So you really feel a responsibility to the town and to the supporters, and that added layer of pressure was very evident. But I actually found that I sort of thrived on that, and I think that was the next part of my career that I was waiting for. I got a little bit frustrated with, you know, obviously you get frustrated with some of the booing and the abuse and some things that might happen off the field if things aren't going well. And it's another lesson as a professional player, Cotsy, that it can be a bit fickle, you know, because, you know, 6 months later, those same people are cheering and patting you on the back and they love you. So, you know, I think it's important to remember, just if you're ever a professional player of any sort, that just put it into perspective. You know, there isn't a lot of rationality about some of the reactions that go on. The same people that might be online abusing you these days are the same people that will praise you if things turn around. And you're not a different person in any way. It's just that the result of the game was the only thing that's different. So when you look at it like that, it actually becomes, you know, kind of laughable, really. You can just put it into perspective and move on, I think.
Very good. So those old pictures and feelings that you used to be able to extract from Shoot magazine, because we had to, like you said earlier, you had to paint your own pictures and imagine your own world within a magazine and try and get the feel of what they were talking about when they were interviewing players and talking about the word professionalism, which has got nothing to do with so much about money, but more about attitude and the way you conduct yourself. And then the feeling of, you know, the roar of a crowd, reading it in a magazine and, you know, again, painting pictures or developing what we think is going on out of a book. And now at Sligo, you're finally getting to do it and you're getting the up and down emotions, which is all part of the journey. But you're finally starting to understand what Shoot and Soccer Action were telling you or what you imagined in there.
100%. Yeah. Look, it had fanzines. It had weekly interviews. It had post-match media. Yeah, it had everything that in your head you wanted to be a part of, sitting in your bedroom reading that Shoot magazine. So you're right. Kotzi, all these things are important parts of the development of a kid, and the dreams that young girls and boys have when they go off on their journey.
Yeah, very good. Now, you came back. Why did you decide to leave?
Well, yeah, a couple of things. By that time, I'd met my now wife, Vanessa. So Vanessa was back in Sydney, and so there was obviously a big part of coming back to see Vanessa, and also that was the time that we were back at the under-23 level there for the Atlanta Olympics. And I was pretty keen not to make the same mistake that I'd sort of made at Celtic by waiting too long to get back on the radar for those teams. So I was sort of keen to see whether I could get a year of football, maybe at NSL level, and then be on the radar for that squad. But unfortunately, never really worked out that way. And probably another lesson about it's... having been away for so long, there was probably just a little bit too hard to just slot straight back in at the level I thought that I would be welcomed at. Sort of had to go back and reprove all of that, which is okay. I think eventually I did get back to reproving all of that, but probably lost a year in doing that. And by that time, the Olympic squad had been selected, and I'd missed out on that 23 squad to go to Atlanta. So, but that was okay. I still think the reasons for coming home were, the right ones, and it ultimately let me sort of get on with the other phase of life. I think if I hadn't have sort of made that decision at that young, I would have been playing catch up post my career in the 30s with whatever else was going to be next for me after football. So, whilst it didn't work out for the Atlanta team, I think the fundamental reasons for coming home ended up being the right ones that have worked out really well.
Professionally, what did you do when you got back in terms of schooling and preparation for work? What did you get involved in?
Well, I didn't finish VCE, so I didn't finish school. So I was fortunate to be accepted by application into a sports administration TAFE course for a diploma only. And that was really my lucky break. I consider that just as lucky as some of the squads I got selected in. A year into that course, we did a marketing subject. I loved marketing, and I transferred. I actually ended up doing a dual sports administration and marketing diploma at the TAFE, at Barton TAFE. That was 3 years of study whilst I was playing for Gippsland, the Gippsland Falcons, and then managed to then get into a university course for Bachelor of Business Marketing, and ended up, after the Gippsland journey ended, working in for a credit union in marketing finance, and have pretty much had roles in marketing, commercial or sports administration ever since, which has been really thankful that there's been something post-football which so many players really struggle with.
Yeah. So Canberra Cosmos, I remember you being there, and I thought I'll have a look at some stats and whatever, but you weren't there very long, and I can see why, because everyone I've spoken to has got it down as a basket case. Was it any different when you were there?
It was the first year they were back in. I think there was great ambition for it. Lockie was there again. Lockie was at Canberra.
Was Mick Lyons when you were there?
Yeah, Mick, because Locke had played with Mick in Malaysia at the time, and Mick came over. I think it was well-intentioned, Kotzi, and I think the first season was much better than a basket case. I think they were having a genuine crack, had a real crack. And I still think football's got a positive future at the national level in Canberra if with access and if someone can make it work. I actually think that one probably fell over more for me rather than them. I just wasn't really where I wanted to be at that point, and they didn't make a commitment to me for any longer than a month. So I think once they had sort of only made that commitment, and maybe that was because they were a fledgling club and didn't have a lot of money and couldn't make much more of a commitment than that. But, obviously I didn't really feel like they had invested a massive amount of trust in me. And I was probably tired of, from a professional footballer's point of view, if you just keep getting asked to sort of so-called trial month to month to continue to prove yourself, it doesn't work. Like you can't be constantly on the watch, on the clock. You've got to be, at some point, you've got to feel like you belong and you're natural and you can just go and be yourself in a football environment, rather than every day is a trial and every time you play, you've got to be at your absolute best. And I think that just came at a time when I was over the whole, I don't know if anybody out there has ever trialled for a football club, but it's not that much fun. And you're very relieved if once it's over. Yeah. You've just spent the best part of 6 months on trial everywhere. It's often got nothing to do with the club you've gone to and everything to do with you. You're just over it. You just need a break from it. So
yeah. So you had a few stints, like you went to Westvale, would have been through the Vivian Collections Day, was that right? At that time?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. That was sort of Heidelberg at the time, were obviously VPL, but had the Collingwood license sort of approved. So they were sort of setting up for the future. And and Stubbsy was at Westvale. So Stubbsy had a lot of great players. Willie Rains, some great players, Chatsatrifalu. So, it was a great time. It was really fun. State league Divi 2, but but felt professional actually, because that's how Stubbsy runs his show. And then, but yeah, it was the Vivian's Collection Association, really more with a view to being back at Heidelberg.
Yeah, fair enough. You spent then 3 or 4 years at Gippsland Falcons. That must have been an enjoyable period then. Almost like a Sligo in terms of being able to settle in, not be doing trials from month to month.
Yeah, I got lucky. Unbeknownst, I guess as part of that process going into the Canberra Cosmos, I did have a 4-week period with South Melbourne with Frank Arrock. And a lesson for me was, I could have probably made that work at South Melbourne at the time. Frank offered me 1 year. They weren't financial conditions that I agreed with, and because to be honest, they were going to actually force me to stay at home. I wouldn't have been able to live away from home with the money that was being offered. But in hindsight, it probably would have been a smarter move to cop that for a year and then prove yourself a little more and maybe earn a little bit more than what Frank was offering. But I guess the positive of it was Frank wanted me to sign, and that trial went well. But I sort of walked away from that because I didn't like the commercial terms of the offer. And that obviously ended up with me at sort of Canberra and then Westvale and then Heidelberg. And then Frank ended up coaching Port Melbourne at the time. He'd left South and was coach at Port Melbourne. And I was very fortunate that Frank doesn't sort of hold grudges or anything. He must have just seen a decent footballer and said, I want you to come and join me at Port.
Yeah.
With a view to going to Gippsland. So that's how it worked. And I was lucky, and I wasn't, and at that point, I'm thankful to say I learnt my lesson. We didn't really haggle over commercial terms. I just wanted the opportunity to play back in the NSL, whatever that might look like. And I was very, very fortunate that it turned out to be, 4 great years with Gippsland. And just a great team, great people. We actually hated the travel up and down, 4 times a week. We spent but in that, really great friendships were formed in the car on the way up and down because we just spent so much time with each other, down and up the highway. So, yeah, Nick Palomares and Brian McNichol and Manny Godis and, a young Archie Thompson came through, a young Johnny Hutchinson came through that team. Jim Curtis, so many really good players that are still friends to this day, which is which is much more important than just the playing side of it, as we all know. So very fortunate, very fortunate. And a big thanks to Frank.
Your memories of working with Frank, what are they?
Oh, look, even though I thought I was a little more experienced by the time I got to Gippsland, it took me 6 months to not be scared of him. He was just really intimidating and forthright, positive, knew what he wanted. But once you're with him for about 6 weeks, right, I think we all worked out that all of the bluster was on show, to be honest. Like, what sat behind Frank was this wonderful sense of humour, and half the time he was doing it, and he was having fun with it. Right, it was all part of his show. And once you worked out that it was part of his show, he was just a fantastic person to be around and talk to and have fun with. He was constantly scheming, and that's the sort of coach he was. Like, if you remember him, he was the sort of coach that could tactically work out the other team's strength and would set up to negate the other team's strength, rather than be a coach that sort of said, well, these are our strengths and we don't care what they do. He was the perfect coach for bringing down the superpowers of the other side. He always had a tactic and a scheme and a philosophy and a strategy. And that was definitely, that was sort of how the Socceroos sort of got success through that period as well, wasn't it? So, yeah, just I don't think he's underappreciated. I think he's very much appreciated in the Australian football fraternity for what he's done for our game, and certainly a very valuable part of my life and career, and I certainly thank him a lot. And I know all of the Gippsland players had nothing but love for Frank when he moved on.
No, very good, very good. All right, we won't wind up quite yet, but I'm going to play the hypothetical schoolyard selection team. My theory is that when you're having a discussion in a pub or anywhere on Twitter, and you need to select between, Ronaldo and Messi, as such, that conversation, I always use let's line them up in the schoolyard, and you've won the toss and you've got to pick, you're the captain. The schoolyard football, that's the most important thing when you're at primary school, and you've got 24 hours of bragging rights, or not, if you lose, of course.
No question.
Go for it.
Oh, no, I said no question. I agree.
All right, so it's a five-a-side. You win the toss. You get to pick first. I'll give you the two options each time, and we'll see how your five-a-side lines up against my five-a-side. So in goals, you've got to choose Schwarzer or Bosnich.
Schwarzer for me, for sure. Apologies to you, Bozza, but I grew up with Schwartzy from about the age of 13, playing against his New South Wales teams in national titles, and obviously Schwartzy was at the under 16 89 World Cup with me, and just a phenomenal goalkeeper. For him to go on and have over 100 caps for the Socceroos is just a testament to his skill, his professionalism, and the type of player that he was. So, Schwarzer for me, but you've got a pretty good one. You've got a pretty good one.
Popovic or Moore?
Well, it's another one that I played with. I can't go past Popper. Apologies, Maury, again. Maury also played for Rangers, right? So, I understand that.
Old prejudices, right?
I understand Maury's going to rake the studs down my leg in this five-a-side game. That's okay. But, Popper's another one that, you watch the way Popper coaches now, and it's exactly as he played. It's the preparation, the professionalism, the standards, the discipline of his teams, and they play very much in a mirror of him. So, yeah. Are you going to recreate the 1989 under 16 Joey's team here?
Just about. Ocon or Zelic?
Another one. Parlo was in the 20s. with that team that I was part of qualifying for Portugal. I'm happy to say this. I came back from Scotland once to an AIS training session with that team, and Paul was doing things that I hadn't seen anyone do overseas. And it was remarkable. The thing Paolo had was this pace, the vision and the passing range of Paolo Ocon was off the charts. And, obviously you're comparing him to a bloody good one as well in Ned, who was very similar player, but it's Paolo for me.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'm happy with Ned, but I just think about when I visualise Paul Ocon and his time, him on the ball, he's got for me, his touch and his passing and just the delicacy of the way he caressed the ball was very similar to Mark Viduka. I know they were different positions and they did different things, but I don't know that we've had two players with just such good touch than Ocon and Viduka. But anyway, we'll leave that one.
I was on the field, Cotsy, and Paolo used to hit passes that you actually thought you could intercept, but they'd go past you.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, good player. All right, here's one. It's blue and green again for you. I'm pretty sure I know what the answer's going to be. McStay or Gascoigne?
I've told you again, I'm taking Paul McStay, not Paul Gascoigne. I used to love watching Gazza, mind you, through that period. He broke Scotland's heart a couple of times with some phenomenal goals, and obviously was amazing later in his career with Rangers. But I don't think it'd be funny. Anybody that might be watching this might not have seen Paul McStay's body of work. Some of his passing is just amazing, crazy good, and
very gifted player.
Yeah, he could have played at any English Premier League club that wanted him, no problem.
Yeah, agreed. All right, last one up front: Charlie Nicholas or Henrik Larsson?
I got to go Champagne Charlie. Yeah, maybe because he was on my wall in the Shoot magazine. I can't go past him. I wasn't there when Henrik was at Celtic, unfortunately, so I didn't get to meet or have a relationship with Henrik. But it's some player. But I can tell you now, some of the stuff Charlie Nicholas did on the training field. You know yourself, Cotsy, sometimes when these players are on the training field, they can try things and do things and show you things that they're not allowed to do on match day.
Yep.
Some of the stuff Charlie did on the training field was out of this world, mate. It was almost like he could play football with a blindfold on, He just knew where everybody was.
Yeah, I was a big fan, and I was heartbroken when he chose Arsenal. I mean, he could have went to Man U, Liverpool, and he probably had a pick of the lot. And I was just devastated he chose Arsenal back at that stage. I really wanted him to come to Liverpool, even if he wasn't going to be successful. And he probably would have been, because at the time Liverpool were winning everything. But just like, man, sign for the team that I support. No such luck. But yeah, he was some player. And Shoot magazine with those drawings of the double page dipped out of breaking up that goal against Belgium, and you're thinking, this is the best thing. This is the closest thing we've got to video. was a coloured drawing of him in the middle of the Shoot magazine, and keep going referring back to Shoot magazine's crazy.
Yeah, I remember Dad having a video of that game, and the ball gets knocked over the top. He takes one touch and sort of volley chips the keeper. I think he was on debut for Scotland that day. It was breathtaking. It was one of the best goals I've ever seen. It was.
Look, I could be wrong. The timeline might be wrong, but it might have been the same season before he moved to Arsenal when he got the 50-odd goals at Celtic. And I think that season it wouldn't have mattered where he was or what he was doing. Like he said, blindfolded, he would have scored in the league as well. He was just on fire. It was crazily good.
Yeah, amazing. It's not a bad side.
You've done well. I like your team. I mean, I'm pretty happy with mine, but I'm happy to see how you've gone. We've had some successes on and off the field. Now you're working in the game, and we've discussed development, we've discussed pathways, we've discussed a lot of things. Before we do finish up, I want to know what advice do you give to a young 16-year-old kid who could go overseas at the moment and is toying up whether he should or shouldn't, with the you know, the benefit of hindsight and all the experience you have? You're now the advisor. What do you do? What do you tell a young kid?
Any young girl or boy that has a dream to play at the highest level inevitably will have to go overseas at some point. You know, the female pathway may take you through the US college system, for example. Female football in Europe is now, you know, a box office. Transfers, transfer deadlines, transfer signings announced. It's been fantastic to see, you know, Lydia Williams joining Arsenal. You know, these types of things are now happening. So both our male and female footballers are going to have to understand and embrace this. And I would say, don't go until you're emotionally ready to go. And make sure you go to an environment that you're going to be very well supported in. And it's got to be an environment that suits you. And don't make it the team you supported as a kid, or you know, the city that you might necessarily like to live in. Choose it specifically for the football environment that's going to best develop you and best suit your personality. And because it's going to be tough. All I can do is tell people exactly what will happen. And what will happen is, for the first 6 months, the players in the dressing room are highly unlikely to welcome you. Highly unlikely, because you're taking their jobs. And for those 6 months, you're going to be tested every day in uncomfortable environments that are very different to what you're used to in Australia. Because you're used to coming to environments in Australia where you might hug your players, high five your mates. You know, they're supportive of you. They want you to do well. You want them to do well. But for the first period of time, when you go into a fully professional environment, there's going to be a competitive tension around roles and jobs and, you know, hoot status in the team, which is completely different to what you've experienced in Australia. And you just need to be ready for that. Don't fear it. Don't get concerned about it. Know that it'll change, because, like everything, as you develop new relationships and they trust you and they know that you're only there to support them and the success of their club, then it'll all dissipate very quickly and you'll move through it quite quickly. But you just need to be ready for that tough time, and don't give up at the first hurdle. You know, you just have to push through it. So things like weather, language, food, culture, all these things are going to be very different to you. And the more you can mentally set yourself to cope with those changes, embrace those changes and get through it, then the other side of that's just amazing. Like, it's the best career, the best profession, the best lifestyle that you could ever have. And you should savor it, because it's only for a short period of time, and you need to really value it while it's there. I actually get, you know, I think a lot of footballers will tell you this, but after your career finishes, you have to do all these things about where you're at and what your next job might be. And people say to you, well, what's your dream job? Tell me what your dream job is. And I say, forget about it. I've already had it. The dream job's not coming anymore. I've already had my dream job, and it was being blessed to wake up every day, put football boots on and kick a ball around. And I'm never going to get the opportunity to do that ever again. So now I need to reimagine what my next best job might be. But the best job, your dream job, is if you're in an environment of other professional players every day playing, then all the effort, all the hardship, every challenge that you've overcome is well and truly worth it. So that would be what I'd say.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you taking out so much of your time to have a chat with me. I always enjoy chatting and having a discussion about anything, but football especially. And thanks for sharing your story. I loved it. I knew it I knew a little bit about it, but I've learned a lot more after our discussion, and the audience are going to love it. Just before we finish off, currently, we're in the middle of lockdown in a pandemic that's, 1 in 100, 1 in 200, 1 in 300 years. Just quickly, Vic football, where are we at?
Yeah, it's been devastating for the football community, but obviously devastating, particularly for Victoria with this second wave. So where we're at is we're in the hands of obviously any government direction that's coming. All we can say to everybody in Victorian football at the moment is when we do get the opportunity to play our game again, we'll be ready to play the game again. And if that is later in the season and needs to be with some creative competition structures and at times that you're not used to playing football, so be it. My feeling is that we're all going to be so sick of lockdown by the time this 6-week period ends that the kids, the players and volunteers are all going to be really desperate to flood out of their homes and have activities of which football has to be part of and has to be ready to go with. So, that's where we're at the moment. It's been hard for Football Victoria. All of our staff are on JobKeeper at the moment, and they're going through some difficult times as well as employees and staff. So just like our football clubs and our football community, everyone's in this together. And I think this is a great time for clubs to really demonstrate what a club is, the value to the community that clubs provide. We've certainly said to the Victorian State Government that it's important our clubs remain viable because they're important community hubs, important multicultural hubs. And even if we're not playing football, we can still be relevant in terms of getting support to needy, checking in on those that are most vulnerable. If it takes things like distributing shopping or basic grocery needs to people, there's a whole range of other activities and other important things that football clubs can do at this time that continue to demonstrate why we're part of the rich tapestry of the Victorian community. So that's what we're just going to try and stay focused on. I think you know what it's like, Cotsy. If it's a difficult time, just try and help someone. I think Craig Foster leads very well in that way. He just completely consumes himself with how he can help some other people, and I think that's a great lesson for us all until we can come back out and hopefully get to some sense of normality.
Brilliant. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to catching up with you hopefully at a game soon, much sooner than later, and we can have a drink as well. Nice to chat to you, mate. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, let's do that, Cotsy. I look forward to it, and thank you. It's been really enjoyable.